welcome and thank you all. My name is Jeremy Liew. I'm a managing director at Lightspeed Venture Partners. I'm one of the organizers of the event today, so thank you all for coming. I focus on internet and gaming investing at Lightspeed. We've got a terrific panel, I think, here today. Starting from the far end, we've got Mark Pincus, who is the co-founder and CEO of Zynga. Zynga's mission is to connect the world through games. They're the largest social gaming service and the largest third-party developer on Facebook, with 11 million daily users and 50 million monthly users. I think now 12 million daily users, right? And 50 million monthly users, with a variety of different games such as Texas Hold'em Poker, Mafia Wars, Yovel, and Scramble, something for everyone. I've asked Mark to compose a haiku to...
Do you have it?
I don't have your haiku, no.
I emailed it to you.
I've asked Mark to compose a haiku, but he left it, but a dog ate his homework. So I'm going to have to come back to him and he can scramble while he figures it out.
575, right?
575.
I'm in the same boat. I sent my haiku to you as well.
Look, maybe Jeremy
I'll
ate
take it up on
homework.
email.
All right. We'll can the haikus. Sitting next to him is John Pleasance, who's the new CEO of Playdom as of a few days ago. John was previously president and COO of Electronic Arts. He joined Playdom a few days ago. It's a leading social gaming company with the tagline, "Where players rule." Playdom's committed to delivering the best possible player experience to its more than 20 million active users on Facebook, MySpace, and High5. And sitting next to him is Sebastien de Halleux, who is the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Playfish. Playfish is also one of the world's largest and fastest growing social gaming companies. We actually have the three largest and fastest growing social gaming companies on the panel today. It combines creativity, innovation, and originality to create games for friends to play together, with a mission to change how the world plays games by providing more social and connected experiences. And did you remember your haiku?
I'm afraid not.
So we have three haiku-less
We're
panelists
haiku-less.
today. Never mind. Let's move on. So as I mentioned, we have the three biggest social game companies on the planet on this panel today. And I think one of the biggest challenges with social gaming, with all gaming, is the hit-driven nature of the gaming business. So I think it's fair to say that, 3 months ago, you guys were clearly the three biggest social game companies. And then out of nowhere comes Farmtown to become the #1 app and the #1 game on Facebook in something like 2 or 3 months. So how do you guys think about how you deal with this very kind of hit-driven nature where new successful companies and games can come out of the blue? Maybe Mark, do you want to start off and then we'll come down the panel?
Sure. While there's a lot of similarities to the gaming business, I think there's more things about social gaming that are different than similar. So while it's true that there have been games that have shot up out of nowhere and gotten big, they haven't replaced the other popular games. They've just expanded the market. And I think the #1 thing we should all keep in mind is that this is a new and really amazingly fast-growing market, and it's a blue ocean, not a red ocean, as opposed to the video game business where John just came from, where it's mature. The console business is mature, not really expanding, and so for your game to win, another one has to lose. But in social gaming, where it's free, people can play many, and there's many people who are just getting introduced to it. We welcome the farm towns of the world. They're great. They're introducing probably many more new people to social gaming than taking people away from our games. So even though in the last 5 months Farmtown has grown to almost 4 million daily active users, all of our games have grown as well.
And Mark, I think you actually welcomed Farmtown with Farmville yesterday.
That's right.
So welcome,
we love
Farmtown.
farming.
I'm gonna go to Sebastien next, and then I'm gonna finish up with John because I think he can probably bring a good contrast to the broader gaming industry on this topic. Sebastien.
Well, I think Farmtown has illustrated a very important trend, which is completely new in the world of video games, which is there is no distributor. Users are responsible for distribution, and that creates a level playing field, which is not catalog driven. And unlike EA, who's managed to build a stronghold on retail distribution and making it very hard for new entrants like Slashkey to create a new game, Facebook has created an environment where there is no more catalog, and quality drives distribution because it's up to the users themselves to distribute products. So for me, it's a testament that Facebook and social networks in general are working and creating something very exciting, because a newcomer in a crowded field can come and create a #1 hit. So that's really a proof that users win all the way in the social gaming proposition. From a business perspective, though, creating a business is more than creating one game, and so we are all working very hard to try to create and put together creative studios which can generate multiple hits and which can learn from one title to the next, and which can create titles that address specific needs in the audience. So at Playfish, we've created 7 games in 18 months. Each game attracts a slightly different audience, but there's a difference between creating one hit title and several. And so we are definitely looking very closely at Slashkey's next title, which I hope will be announced soon.
So I want to come back to this idea of the repeatability of games in a second, but first I'd like to hear from John. Sebastien says that in social games, quality is more important than distribution. Do you agree, and do you think that's different from other games?
Let me go to your first question, which is, I think we have violent agreement here that new hit games are just driving category growth. Number one, there's a level playing field in this category, which is what allows a lot of people to generate a lot of interest here, which I completely agree with. I guess I'd say the other thing too about risk mitigation of hits is that what's really cool about this category is that it's social gaming, and so a lot of the attractiveness of the product itself is not just the IP or the game. It's the way it interacts and the ability for each of our respective companies to kind of nail the viralness of it, the engagement of it, and then ultimately the monetization of it. So it's that mechanic around social gaming that is a giant part of the equation of success, rather than just simply the game, which is a little bit different than more of a traditional business. And of course, I know, Jeremy, you and I have talked about this too, just because of the nature of the business and the fact that the web is the gaming platform here, obviously the cost of production can be lower, the amount of swings at the plate can be more. The games are changing on a weekly and or daily basis. So something that doesn't necessarily have to be a hit out the door, it can change and it can evolve, and all of that is sort of a way of mitigating risk in terms of driving a hit portfolio. In terms of, I guess your second question was, is distribution more important than IP?
Yeah, Sebastien said that unlike in traditional game, packaged retail, in the case of social games, quality is more important than distribution.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm much of an authority on this, but thinking about gaming overall, whether it be social gaming or other gaming, I've been a big believer, and I've been reasonably vocal over the last few years since I've been in this sort of gaming space, that digital distribution is a hugely important thing. And it doesn't really matter which angle you're coming from, whether you're looking at the infrastructure to run something like WoW, or whether you're looking at what's going on with co-op and multiplayer games and how that's expanding and driving hits in the core business, or what's happening on regular portal distribution and or social games, or even mobile infrastructure now that you have things like the iPhone out there and Android coming. The ability to be able to deploy in multiple countries, to be able to be viral, to be able to have billing systems, that general platform, if you call it digital distribution, I think is the most important thing in gaming right now.
So, Mark, you guys have launched a few iPhone games. How would you contrast this issue of a stranglehold of distribution versus free distribution for iPhone relative to social networks and social games?
I'm sorry, how would I contrast which?
The idea of distribution being important and being difficult to control versus a more open environment where games can get discovered more easily.
Well, currently, so first of all, we think that iPhone and other smartphones represents a really important platform for social gaming because it's going to make social gaming accessible to a lot of people who just would never get it. They don't have the time at their desk or at a PC, and they have time on the go. So we've made a big commitment to iPhone and mobile far ahead of the business opportunity. In terms of the distribution, I think it's much more like the traditional mobile business. It's more open, but so you can get out there, and if you're popular, you can climb the rankings. But because there isn't yet a social network embedded in it, there isn't the easy discovery mechanisms that you have on a social network. And so I think it's just much more constrained. And oddly, that probably makes having distribution much more important. And as opposed to, I guess, Sebastian's point about quality selling probably gets too magnified because the funnel's too small. When you have a top 25, it makes it much more difficult to climb and stay as a large popular game.
I think this is a really important point and a really important difference between iPhone games and social network games. You know, with so much of discovery of iPhone games coming from the top 25 list, it's more like retail in that there can only be 25 games in the top 25. There can only be so many games at retail on the shelf. And that's quite a different dynamic from the social networks where the discovery is not limited to, you know, a single place.
Jeremy, I would just add, it would be awesome if, I'm struggling because we're all so busy with our day jobs, but it would be awesome if we found a way to come together and have more of one voice as an industry, because if we all went and talked to Apple or to Palm and if we all kind of put out what we thought was the best of breed requirements for an open social gaming platform on mobile, we might help them, you know, open it to games faster than if we have individual conversations.
I suspect, though, Jeremy, that may change a little bit over time too. I think that you know, each of the three companies here, as you described, you know, we have very large user bases right now, and I think that gives us, you know, I guess you would call it distribution advantage over time in launching new games, because obviously we have a lot of users that we know that we can launch into, and that's a really important thing. And I think all three of us, you know, compete aggressively to continue building that for exactly that reason. I would think over time that you may see that kind of thing evolve onto the iPhone too. I would suspect that, you know, certainly I would aspire for this for Playdom, and I would imagine my colleagues here would think the same thing. But you know, there's going to be increasingly large providers of games on that platform, and I'm sure there's going to be connective tissue between them.
So I would like to make a distinction between, you know, the platform and the device, because for us, the next generation gaming console are social networks. They are the platform. So Facebook is the gaming platform. iPhone is a great media device, and so far we've seen great content being developed for the iPhone as a media device, mostly ports from existing console games. Really, the way that, you know, Playfish sees the iPhone is an access device onto social network as a platform. So the games that we've released, Who Has the Biggest Brain, for example, on your iPhone, lets you play with your Facebook friends, and it's really the same application and the same scoring mechanism and the same game as service proposition, just on a different access device. So I think there'll be really a definition of two categories of game on platforms, if you want, a device like the iPhone, some which are utilizing the media aspect of the device and the accelerometer and some of the stuff that SGN is doing, for example, versus social games, which are game as services, which are run on a multiple and accessed through a multiple series of devices, whether that's your laptop, your phone, or now your TV through the console connections.
So this has actually transitioned the conversation into a pretty interesting topic, which is the idea of the ability to launch games, new games, and how companies who have scale can have certain advantages of doing that because of cross-promotion and so forth. You know, John, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about this idea of cross promotion and using the installed user base, and how you see that becoming an advantage over time for companies such as yourselves.
Yeah, again, I don't know that I have any deeper brilliance in that. I know it has been a great strength of my Playdom colleagues who I'm looking at over there, who've done a great job of that in terms of building themselves into the #1 MySpace social gaming company, and of late have been growing rather significantly on Facebook. I think that leveraging that database is a huge part of what keeps our marketing customer acquisition cost low. We've been enjoying good economics on all of our games, and again, I think most of the tribute goes to a team that is incredibly focused on leveraging that install base and and growing it, and then doing all the metric tracking that we do inside each one of our games. So, yeah, it's vitally important. I can't imagine it's any different than what these two gentlemen are doing.
So I'm going to ask Sebastien to maybe talk a little bit about how you guys have done some cross-promotion leverage, and then also to talk a little bit about how you guys think about viral growth in particular.
So we generally disagree with cross-promotion or an existing install base being a huge advantage. You're just talking about Farmtown. It's a good example of a company that had no cross-promotion. I'll give you an example from Playfish. We launched our last game called Restaurant City, where you run a restaurant with your friends 5 weeks ago with no cross-promotion whatsoever, and it grew to 5 million users in 5 weeks. And our philosophy is to make it hard for people to spread your content, because if you do so, and if you just provide them with an invite button on the side of your game, then you ensure that quality is the key driver for that action, and that essentially filters your user base and ensures that only people who really are deeply engaged with your content involve their friends into that experience. And that has resulted in Playfish having one of the most loyal user base, the most engaged user base. It goes against some of the common sense, because of course you can so-called tune virality, but then if you're trying to build a long-term business, it's not only about how quickly you can rip through an audience, it's about how you can capture your audience imagination, and how you can day in, day out provide value to them and their friends playing together.
Mark, Zynga's taken a slightly different approach.
Well, we're actually right in the middle of these two. So I agree with both. So on the one hand, we follow very similar process to Sebastien in that we test our games, and we look for success metrics that the game is going to drive around virality, engagement, and retention before we launch the game. And we've unfortunately or fortunately, we've killed a few games that most of you have never heard of. A few have. We had a game called Guild of Heroes that you can still access and be one of 10,000 lucky people who play it. But we probably invested, I don't know, $2 million or more in that game, but because it couldn't drive what we thought were the right metrics to be successful, we never launched it. So our approach is get to the metrics that show us that we have the quality that a game can persist and be a good long-term investment, but then we will also promote a game heavily once we know that it's going to do well to accelerate its entry into the market.
What are the metrics and what are the targets that you guys use to figure out if you're going to put that promotional muscle behind the game?
What are what?
What are the metrics and what are the targets for those metrics that you guys use as a gauge before you put the promotional muscle behind the game?
You mean what are the specific? Oh, well, you'd have to join our company to.
But maybe I can answer that. At Playfish, the core metric, I hear lots of people here talking about virality, and for any one of you in the audience who's not familiar with social game, it's a strange term to be in a gaming business and talk about virality, which sounds quite negative. I think the Playfish approach of distribution is to focus on something quite different, which is fun. And the core metric for us to spread a game, i.e. to release it outside, is when everyone in the company can only do one thing, is play the new game, which happens a lot. And by focusing on this puts game design as the core driver of distribution. We call this designing games as objects of social interaction. So traditional game design is all about immersive experiences. You buy something off a shelf, and then you are immersed into a hand 3D experience with great surround sound and fantastic graphics, and you get deeper and deeper into the game. we try to design games as objects of social interaction, meaning you get a benefit as a user of inviting new friends in the game. So if you're distributing, a game like Tetris to your friends, you have no benefit of doing so. But if you design a game like Restaurant City, where sure you could be playing Restaurant City on your own, but how much more fun is it to involve your friend and put them as janitor cleaning up your restaurant, or cook preparing dishes for your restaurant? That's where you get incremental fun of playing the game with your friends, like a traditional board game, whether that's Monopoly or Pictionary. And that's really what drives distribution, is the desire for users to involve other users, their friends, into the experience. So the metrics is not, a measure of have we hit, 1 million DAU. It is a question of, are we ourselves so engrossed in the game that we want to send it to our own friends? Because if we are, then, they will in turn want to send it to their own friends. And that's really the litmus test for
But Sebastien, so my question is, so what do you do with a game like mini golf?
So we couldn't stop playing, but then we have a bias as being gamers of liking the kind of slightly longer game mechanics. We put it out there. Mini golf had over 1 million or 2 million DAU, as a matter of fact, which by many standards makes it a hit. But it wasn't a hit as big as maybe Pet Society, which has 11 million monthly active users. So it is something that we've learned from. We try to push the boundaries, and when we create a title, we try to define a proposition that goes after a specific niche and see how the niche responds. So you'll see many more sort of experiments like this, some which are more or less successful.
Jeremy, I just add, kind of connecting the dots on the how important it is to have a big user base and how do you interact with that user base in order to make hits. We had a pretty interesting thing happen over the last couple of weeks with Sorority Life, which is one of our more popular games, where we were, out of our customer service area, we were getting a lot of feedback that people wanted to have cars input into the game. And so it became a big voting mechanism of what kind of car people wanted. It turned out actually the pink Volkswagen was the one, and I think we sold in 2 days over $100,000 of pink Volkswagens, which was obviously a great thing. But that interaction with your big user base to help continue to evolve the game, I think, is a really important part of it. I think we also, during the same period of time, had people were submitting questions about our game. We had about 1,500 different questions that were being submitted from our user base. And then we had people vote and rank those questions, and I think 60,000 votes came in ranking those questions. And then our actual, product managers and EPs were actually answering those questions for people in real time, and we got through about 500 of them. But that connection with a big user base where you're continuing to evolve and make a game better, that really feels like it's part of the special sauce that you can do in this category that's very difficult to do, in other types of categories.
I think John has a very, very important point, and this is the most exciting thing about this whole space, is that for the first time there's no middleman handling distribution, so you can connect with your audience in a way that has just never been possible before. And for game designer, this is incredibly fun and empowering, because the users give you this real time feedback. And you can go on playfish.com and click on community, and you'll see our millions of users sending us pictures of them holding a Playfish sign wherever they play, whether that's in the Indonesian jungle or in metropolis around the world. And there's just no game company in the traditional space that has this amount of love and engagement from the community that's communicated real time back to the developers. So that's a really important point that we share.
I'd like to touch on a related topic, which is, Sebastien, you talked a lot about playing with your friends and wanting to invite your friends to be able to, increase the enjoyment of the gameplay. To what extent do you think social games are truly social relative to being mostly multiplayer, and the social networks being, simply a distribution channel for those games? And I'm actually going to ask each of you guys that same question.
Okay. So I think the reason we are focused on your friends is because if you look at it, creating game is about creating a product or a service that generates emotions. And that's really the core of what we do. When we try to put a new game together, we try to create those emotions. Traditionally, emotions in games have always been of the sort of single-player nature, you versus the game. So stuff like, fear in an RPG of being shot down, achievement of completing a lap, frustration of not completing it in my case. But those kind of emotions. And suddenly, by involving your friends, and I think Nintendo, to give them credit, has been the first company to really show this with the Wii, involving several people in the living room, creates another spectrum of emotions you can tap into, sort of love or friendship or anger or pride, emotions that are felt between two individuals. Now the question is, where do you maximize those emotions? And those emotions are maximized amongst people who have real-life connections. Because it's one thing to be beaten in, who has the biggest brain by some random guy on the internet. It's another thing to see your little sister, saying, hey, I've just beaten your high score. And the amount of emotions that you feel is much higher, and hence the engagement is much higher. And I think, what social networks have allowed us is suddenly by mapping friends and by giving an API into this mapping, allowing us to include friends as part of the game. And we haven't invented that. Board games have been doing this for a very long time. I often say that, many of you are maybe playing Settlers of Catan or Monopoly, and you never remember the strategic move that made the evening. You remember, the drink you've had with your friends and the social experience that you went through. So I think that's really where social games are, creating something that was never possible before. There are other ways of using social networks, but we focus really on this friends connection.
John?
I very much agree. I mean, I've really haven't even started to play them yet, but I know that when I'm talking with my colleagues, there's a lot of conversation around what the business objective is in terms of what we're trying to build in the game. So it may be a particular thing around engagement that's being discussed. Then there's the sort of the game mechanic itself, so maybe a story arc or leveling or some kind of achievement that's trying to be built into the game. But then there's this third axis, which I think is where all the special sauce is, which is what's the human reaction here. If it's showing off or being prideful to your friends, then that ties directly to maybe an item having scarcity. And so if you can get a scarce item, then of course it's like a badge on your page. It's just something you're showing off to your friends. But it's that third wire when you go through, and it's exactly what you said. It's fear of losing something, opportunity to gain advantage over somebody else, straight competition, show off. All these different emotions are basically what's fueling these games. And so I echo what Sebastien said there.
Mark?
My take is that we definitely have to be very aware of the context that we are operating in, which is a social network. And the social network is, I like to say, it's fundamentally a cocktail party that you've got all your friends there, and more, if you go to Facebook or MySpace, they're already there for you. And people get fatigued on checking each other out or seeing the news feeds, and so eventually they want something fun that can create a new experience or story with their friends. And so I think successful social games need to build on three legs. One is they have to give you a feeling that you're playing with your real friends, and it has to give you a feeling of it. You see them around, there's things you can do with them, and the successful social games will go deeper and deeper over time with making that real and relevant to you over time. The second is they have to give you a way to express yourself, because a lot of what we're all doing on a social network, whether we mean to or not, is expressing ourselves to people that we care about and sometimes people we don't care about. So I like to say social games need to be a playground for personalities. And it's not just that you have an avatar that can be tricked out. It's your personality will come out in the way you play Settlers of Catan or Risk or Monopoly. So anything that lets you express something about your unique personality will do it and will make you feel more tied to that game. The third pillar is for a long-term successful game is that it has to give players an opportunity to invest in the game over time and a sense that they own something of value, and that's why one reason why virtual items have been so successful. In games of ours like Yeovil, we have players who have over 10,000 items, and they take those very seriously. And all of that together gets to the concept that many of us bring up of social capital. And we're all building social capital in our social networks, in Facebook and MySpace, and the more that social capital is real because we see the value, we can transfer that value into things, the more it's liquid like capital, the more we're tied to those networks. And I believe the same exact function that drives Facebook and MySpace will drive the social games. The more that we all develop games that people feel that they have this deep social capital that they can use, they can come to your game, take that out, and use that for some value to them, whether it's entertainment or not. It could be networking. The more powerful the games are going to be. And the biggest point to me about what I think we have the opportunity to do as an industry is social gaming. If we all double down on this concept of social capital, the reason people came to the social network, I think that social gaming could cross over the way that Facebook did last year and Twitter has this year to be a cultural phenomena. That to get to a point that gaming has never gotten to on the internet, where half of the internet did it last month. Casual gaming has never gotten to that point. Nintendo Wii hasn't even gotten to that point. But we have that opportunity, that social gaming could be as big as social networking.
When you were talking, it just made me think about how much that then means that these games have to be incredibly accessible, and they've got to be really dynamic and deep, and not in a scary kind of a way, but in a way that basically this is how people are going to communicate and interact with each other. I totally agree with what you're saying, which is you can get pretty bored pretty quickly of just watching Twitter feeds after Twitter feeds or just Facebook news feeds or whatever it may be. You want to do something. You want to engage with people, and you experience them in new and different ways. And it's, I agree. I mean, the idea of social gaming almost becomes something where this is how people, this is how friends and families, this is how they interact with each other, like a lot of the time. This is what you do. I certainly have felt that in my personal life, even like in and amongst my family. My connection points with my children are much higher given the fact that I can actually do something with them, whether I'm traveling or not, and it changes my relationship with my kids in a way that I couldn't just write them in an email. It's just a totally different thing, and I think that you're right. This industry has not yet crossed that chasm to where, we're at the interesting part of the curve, of the S-curve on that.
Well, there's an important thing to remember as well is that the game industry is still very successful. The traditional game industry, it's generated, $50 billion last year of people, fully transactional, people going into a shop and spending their cash. So it's an industry that has no problem monetizing. The interesting thing is the fact that this industry over time has always sold product to the same people. The 25-year-old male who's playing Madden 10 or whatever the new franchise is.
That's a good product, Nubby.
But the point is, it's such a successful industry by selling onto its a recurrent user base. The Playfish demographic is 18 to 34 with a 50% gender split. Most of our users have never played a video game in their life. And it's very interesting because when they talk about our games, they don't talk about them as games. They talk about them as social experience they've had with their friends. So typically, you'll see in the Twitter feed from our users, "Hey, I've been sort of redecorated. I've just spent 2 hours redecorating my restaurant, with my friends in Restaurant City," or I'm addicted to Biggest Brain, trying to beat my sister. And it's very interesting to read that because it's a new way of relating to game, and most importantly, to Mark's point, it moves games, which is it's the biggest media industry, onto the broader consumer realm, and it gives access to people who've never had access to games.
Have you ever asked, either of you ever asked your user bases what percentage of themselves consider themselves gamers? I've always wondered, I always thought 90% of people would not call themselves gamers or something, but I don't know if you guys ever did research on that.
So we haven't asked the question in that way, but what we've done is we've put the Twitter stream of all our users on our game pages, and you can just look at it, and they never use the same vocabulary that gamers use, and the way they describe the experiences are much more social.
Yeah.
I think this point is a really important one. A lot of the players here are not considering themselves gamers, and so, the founders of Playdom, the founders of Zynga, did not come out of the traditional gaming industry. The founders of Playfish came out of mobile gaming, which is, I think, quite different from core gaming. And so I think there's a different DNA here that is more web-centric and less kind of traditional gaming-centric, and that's an important distinction. So I want to come back to something that you said earlier, Sebastien, which is how you organize to repeatably build games, given that it's a hit-driven business. Do you want to talk a little bit about the 4 studios you mentioned, roughly how big they are, where they are, and how they organize?
Sure. So Playfish is about a 100-person company. We have 4 offices. We initially started out of London. We have a studio in Beijing, China. We have a studio in Tromsø, northern Norway. It's 200 miles inside the Arctic Circle, for those of you who don't like daylight. And then we have an office here in San Francisco. And the idea is that game is not a science. Building a fun product is not something that you can model. It's something, there's some kind of chemistry that happens between a creative DNA strand and then a technical DNA strand. And so we keep our studio teams quite small and separate from each other, and we give them full creative freedom. The Playfish structure is a structure that tries to elevate, if you want, creative as rock stars inside the organization and give them freedom to do something that's going to have a huge impact on the life of millions of people. And then it becomes a game in itself, because the more your product grows, the more engaged you are as a creative in your product. And I should stop saying product, because this is probably the biggest fallacy in this industry, is that when your game goes live, that's when the real work starts. Because what we are doing, and a big paradigm shift here, is games have moved from being product on a disc to becoming services. So day one of your live game is just the beginning of a very long relationship between the creative team and the audience. So to give you an example, Who Has the Biggest Brain was the first title Playfish released in December 2007, so almost 2 years ago. And it's still in the Facebook top 10. And that's because we do weekly release, we sort of nurture the game, and we keep it simple, very simple, but we listen to what the audience wants. And that's a new model that was just not possible, and a learning sort of a learning curve that was just not possible when you are on 5-year timelines for traditional games.
John, do you want to comment how Playdom is organized for game production?
Sure. So Playdom is based in Mountain View. We have one office today. We have about 65 employees, although we are growing significantly. So anyone who's interested, please contact Playdom. We have 3 founders who are actually in the company on an operating basis. They've all been good friends. They are in their mid-20s. They are all gamers. They are engineering background folks, and they have done a great job of building this over the last 16 months. Playdom was incorporated in February of last year. It was originally called U+, and then in March of this year rebranded itself Playdom and sort of had its coming out party, if you will. We currently have, I think, 12 games on MySpace, 5 on Facebook, and 1 coming soon on iPhone. So that's kind of how we are there. In terms of organization, we most recently hired 2 great executive producers. We will be increasing that as a structure, so it's a sort of a very small, tight studio structure, if you will, starting with 2 now, but expanding. We're building out the product management teams underneath there, as well as the designers and UI folks, et cetera. We have a core engineering group, both split between front-end engineering and back-end engineering, and 2 of our 3 original founders actually run and lead each of those 2 groups. And then we have the traditional business side. So I don't know the exact number, but of the 65 people, I'm guessing that probably somewhere around 45 or maybe more are in actual game production or engineering. So we're pretty light as it relates to things like finance and business development and things like that. So it's pretty lean and mean, but I think it's the exciting thing is we're growing, and we just see nothing but opportunity that we've been talking about all day.
Mark?
Let's see. So we grew from we started in January, February of 2007. By the summer of 2007, we were maybe 10 people. And today we've grown to, I think we're like between 290 or 300 full-time employees. We're maybe 350, including customer support and contractors. And we're also hiring a lot more people and have 80 or 90 open recs. We are organized into product teams that run each of our major games. They're organized into studios. We have 4 different studios. We have an MMO group, casual group, virtual group and a mobile group. And then we have probably 9 or 10 product groups across that. And then we also have, and that's in Potrero Hill, and then we also have a back-end infrastructure group in Los Gatos that does data warehousing and NetOps and stuff like that.
So clearly you guys are really building some pretty scale organizations here.
Yeah,
So
I think we're very similar, just smaller, and he's ahead of us by a year.
It's only 3 months ahead now.
I think we have maybe 5 minutes left, so I'm going to open up for questions from the audience. We've got a question here. I think we're going to bring a microphone to you. If you could just introduce yourself before you ask the question.
Hi, my name is Brian Hennessy. My background is actually neuroscience, and human evolution is, as an evolutionary theorist, I really like watching this space. Relationships evolve, right? I mean, how many of the middle-aged people here know the same friends they had when they were in their teens? So the question for me, that's one of the questions that's really fascinating, is how do you function within the evolution of relationship itself?
So it's something very interesting, because whatever happens in the real world happens inside the games, and social networks are just mirroring what's happening in the real world. So we love behavioral analysis, and when we look at what our players are doing inside Pet Society, which is a virtual world where you decorate your house and your friend's house, around Christmas time we put Christmas trees on sale, around $2 or the equivalent of $2 per Christmas tree. And then we put ornaments on sale, around, again, $2 per ornament. And we sold something like 20 million of those around Christmas. And then we thought, why are our users spending probably more money in virtual Christmas trees and Christmas decoration than in real life? And we asked them the question, we ran some surveys in focus group, and they said, well, we've moved from being very disconnected, and previously, Christmas trees we would put, in our flats would be, something to share with our friends, and really a display of our creativity in our flats. But because people are sort of, all disconnected, they say that, maybe 3 or 4 of their friends will see the real Christmas tree, whereas all of their friends, on Facebook will see the virtual one. And so as a means to socially express themselves, that's what essentially was driving the purchase behavior. And whatever action happens inside the game, whether it is a gift, for example, I give you a birthday cake, which will probably cost 10 times what a regular cake would cost in our food store in Pet Society. You buy this because of the perceived value of your action towards one of your friends, because it's a token of appreciation from you to your friends to send that birthday gift. And similarly, if you do something bad to your friend inside the game, this could mirror the evolution of your relationship in the real world.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to check one thing. Sebastien, did you say that you sold 20 million Christmas trees at $2 a piece?
So the equivalent, sorry, let me just clarify this. So this is the equivalent in virtual currency. Our virtual currency is a function of, like everyone else, attention-based and cash-based. So there's a proportion of the currency that's accrued by spending time inside the game, and a proportion that's paid for cash by our user. But the equivalent in virtual currency, if you had to pay it fully cash, would be $2.
Christmas tree is still a good business, though.
Less messy. I encourage you to try it out.
So the way that I think about the relationships playing out on social networks is, I think that as a culture, we've now, especially with mobile and BlackBerries, we've used up all the time we had. So we don't have any unallocated time anymore. And so what I think people are doing now, they used to be pursuing free people on the internet for the last 10 years were going after this kind of economic curve of saving money or the free curve of value. And I think they're shifting now from economic value to time value. And I think what's driving people on Facebook is that they get a better ROI, and Twitter too, that you can touch more people for one action, for one photo upload, and every relationship is a plate we're trying to keep spinning, and now we've realized that we feel guilty because we haven't talked to your friends since high school that now awkwardly reached out to you through Facebook. And so now you want to touch them in some way, and you're just trying to keep the plate spinning. And so that's what's going on the social network we live on. And then in a way, what we're giving you with games is a way that you can kind of have fun but justify that time, because while you were playing, as opposed to it just being a time waster, now you were playing a game and you managed to touch some more friends, maybe even in a more meaningful way. You know, you don't have time to go play Connect 4 with your niece, but you can take one turn in who has the biggest brain, you know, and feel good about yourself.
And I know you were running out of time here, but I just would echo that. So it's, you know, more ability to keep plates spinning in the real world is the same as the virtual world. But even an example like, you know, playing a game, a social game with one of your colleagues, or maybe someone who works for you. I mean, I've had that experience a lot, and it actually changes my relationship with that person, because over a natural course, I would be talking to them in one way, which is about whatever we're trying to do as a company. But I've developed an entirely different relationship that I never would have done otherwise. I was never going to go to their house and sit down and play Risk. But for some reason, I have this sort of parallel universe with people who actually work with me that's really cool. And it just sort of expands my understanding of who they are. And so that kind of dynamic is happening all over the place, which is what keeps, I think, making this interesting and fuels.
I think I was one of those people that you just touched online only, one of those online only friendships.
I'll take one more question and then we've got to wrap up. Yeah, here.
Hi, my name is Chachin Lee from Offbeat Creations. What proportion of your players are real-life friends versus Facebook friends from the AdMe trains?
That's a good question. Well, I'll take that one, because we have across our games, we do cross both worlds of people playing with people in their networks and people playing with strangers. And I don't know the actual percentages. I think that the idea of building social capital definitely can go beyond your real friends. So first of all, I do think that the reputation that you build with your real friends could carry over to positively or negatively impact how strangers interact with you. So that's one thing we've been thinking more about. But the one statistic I know is on our poker game, 70% of the time when you log on to our poker game, a real friend of yours is also logged on. Because we peak at close to 300,000 peak concurrent users during the day. And so just they average 120 friends, and so that covers 70% of your network.
And at the other extreme, we only focus on real friends. So we don't allow you to play against if you want, strangers, so to speak. Although we recognize that, in WoW, for example, you might be very attached to your guild and you might make friends in that way. So we recognize there is social interaction there. But we think that friends are the most universal structure, that has not been given the chance to interact through games, and that's the opportunity that Playfish is trying to address.
Great. Thank you very much to our panelists, Sebastien, John, and Mark.